Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Herald podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes. To keep in touch with us, use our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, which are all at Q and Review. That's CUEANDREVIEW, or get in touch via information@qandreview.com. That's information@CUEANDREVIEW.com. Please like and share our podcasts and give us any constructive feedback.
The Herald, Monday the 21st of March 2022. News. Glasgow faces new £225 million equal pay bill time bomb. This article is by Martin Williams. Scotland's biggest local authority is facing a ticking £225 million equal pay time bomb 3 years after it had to remortgage major venues to pay for a settlement. It comes as Glasgow City Council workers prepare to work out over an equal pay dispute in 2 days of strike action that a union said will affect home care, schools and other services. The dispute is over what unions see as the reneging of an agreement to settle a dispute which has to date cost nearly £550 million to end chronic sex discrimination. Unison said its members in Glasgow will strike on March the 29th and 30th and will then do so again in April if there is no resolution to the dispute. It is calling out nearly 9,000 members and said that with a sister trade union also joining the action, more than 12,000 workers could strike. This would affect home care, cleaning, catering, schools, nurseries, residential homes, homelessness, hostels and addiction services across the council. The council had part settled with 13,000 women at a total cost of £505 million in 2019. It has emerged that outstanding claims are estimated at £225 million because the unequal pay scheme remains in place. Unions say that over 5,000 claimants have still received no settlement for the period up to March 2018, and 18,000 claimants are still waiting for a settlement for the period after March 2018. Sources say the delay cost to settle claims up to 2018 is at around £25 million, and to make an interim payment to all claimants from 2018 to now stands at approximately £200 million. And unions have warned that the amount will keep growing if nothing is done. There is concern that the new pay and grading system to eliminate gender pay discrimination will not be implemented until 2024 due to the volume of work involved around job evaluation. 3 years ago, the City Council approved plans to sell off major venues to an arm's length body and leased them back in a bid to try and finance the initial £548 million liability. The move affected venues such as the Armadillo, the Emirates Arena, the Riverside Museum and Tory Glen Regional Football Centre, and then leased them back to the council with the cost of the lease designed to meet the loan repayments. The union says that despite promises from Glasgow City Council to settle equal pay claims, thousands of women are still stuck on unequal pay scales, waiting for their claims to be settled in full. Mandy McDowell, Unison Regional Organiser, said every year that employees continue to work under an unequal pay scheme creates another liability for settlement. The intention had been for the council to implement a new equality-proofed pay scheme, but it hasn't done that. The whole thing is delayed and therefore people are still being underpaid. The claims for equal pay have only been settled until 2018. That means low-paid women continue to be underpaid, and this is projected to continue. The settlement only covered one aspect of the claims. Glasgow City Council say the delay in the pay and grading system was agreed with the claimants' representatives, including the unions. They say one of the major reasons was that Unison did not want members to take part in job evaluation interviews during the pandemic. The council was praised 2 years ago by a regulator for their progress in part settling the equal pay dispute. The Scottish Accounts Commission said that dealing with the claims had been a significant development, with more than 98% of cases part settled. The claimant group reached the equal pay deal with the council in 2018. That came after about 8,000 Glasgow council workers walked out on strike for 48 hours in October 2018 in a bid to settle the long-running pay claim. The dispute centred around workers in traditionally female-dominated roles such as catering or home care being paid up to £3 an hour less than those in male-dominated jobs such as refuse workers or grave diggers. In 2017, 2 judgments at the Court of Session ruled that both the Council's Payment Protection Scheme and its Workforce Pay and Benefits Review discriminated against women workers. The claimant group, as part of the 2019 settlement process, agreed to suspend legal proceedings with the Council to focus on replacing the discriminatory pay process. To pay for the claims, Glasgow City Council approved plans to sell off major venues to an arm's-length body before leasing them back. The dispute has been fought through the tribunals and courts for more than a decade. Stems from 2006 when a new job evaluation scheme was introduced by the then Labour-run council with the aim of addressing gender pay inequality. Instead, say the women affected, it entrenched discrimination by paying female-dominated jobs such as catering and cleaning less than male-dominated jobs such as refuse collection because of a complex system that penalised people working split shifts and irregular hours. After decades of Labour control, the SNP won control of the council in elections in May 2017 on a manifesto that promised to settle the claims. But the women's representatives soon accused the council of failing to engage properly in negotiations, while critics accused the unions of manipulating the dispute to score points against the new SNP administration. In 2017, 2 judgments at the Court of Session ruled that both the Council's Payment Protection Scheme and its Workforce Pay and Benefits Review discriminated against women workers. The claimant group, as part of the 2019 settlement process, agreed to suspend legal proceedings with the Council to focus on replacing the discriminatory pay process. Glasgow City Council has said it is prepared to make offers to settle new claims on the basis of the 2019 deal. A council spokesperson said, "There is no estimated cost because there is, at this moment, no agreement. However, negotiations are ongoing and following the process that unions requested and agreed at the time of the 2019 deal. They know we are ready to make offers on the new claims. They know that needs to happen before we can address the gap period." This article is by Martin Williams.
Recorded from the Herald on the 23rd of March 2022 from the sports section. Rangers star Fashion Sakala out of Zambia duty due to positive COVID-19 test by Ewan Payton. Rangers attacker Fashion Sakala has tested positive for COVID-19. The light blue star has withdrawn from the Zambia squad as a result, the Zambian FA has confirmed. Sakala joined Rangers last summer on a free transfer. He's not been a nailed-on starter this season, however, the 25-year-old has featured in some key moments for the Ibrox club. None more so than at the weekend as he helped Giovanni Van Bronckhorst's side come from a goal down to secure a 2-1 win over Dundee. Zambia will play Congo on March 25th before playing Guinea on March 29th in Paris. However, the attacker's positive test means he will now miss the matches as he self-isolates while recovering. The third instalment of the Old Firm Derby takes place on Sunday, April 3rd. The Zambian FA Facebook page reads, Scotland-based Chipolopus striker Fashion Sakala has been ruled out of the international friendly matches lined up during the FIFA window after testing positive for COVID-19. Sakala, who's on the books of Glasgow Rangers, was part of the 23-member squad named by Chopolopa coach Alajosa Azanovic for Friday's match against Congo Brazzaville, which will be in quarantine for 7 days. FAZ General Secretary Adrian Kashala says the association has written to Glasgow Rangers on the player's status and was awaiting formal correspondence. Sakala was scheduled to travel directly to Antalya for the Chipolopo outing, but has since been ruled out after the COVID-19 results came out positive. The article was by Ewan Payton.
The Herald Scotland, Thursday 24th of March 2022. Voices. Politics. Neil Mackay. Now is the time to redesign how the world is governed. Is it yet genocide? Is this what we are watching take shape in Ukraine? A genocide in Europe at the hands of the Russian army? Certainly, Putin has unleashed his atrocity battalions against the Ukrainian people. There are reports of Ukrainians being rounded up and forcibly deported to Russia, where they've been held in concentration camps and turned into slave labourers. We are in the fog of war. The truth will only emerge. But unquestionably, Putin has carried out war crimes. Schools and hospitals bombed, Mariupol obliterated, Goznified, Aleppo'd. Shelters where the word children was written in huge letters to deter attack were deliberately shelled. There have been rapes and murders carried out by Russian soldiers. Ukrainian officials have been kidnapped. Genocide is rightly humanity's most taboo word. It's our greatest crime. It should never be used lightly. But we must listen to victims when they speak. And Ukrainian leaders, from President Zelensky down, accuse Russia of genocide. Putin's army treats Ukrainians as subhuman. This is the seed of genocide. The removal of your enemy's humanity. People are being rounded up by soldiers, put on trains and sent to camps and made to work. We've seen this before in Europe. We're still stained with it to this day. Ola Stefanishnya, a Ukrainian deputy prime minister, says explicitly that she believes genocide is happening. She made the chilling point that the number of civilian victims is far more than those from the armed forces of Ukraine. Zelensky accused Russia of genocide after Putin's forces began their campaign of bombing hospitals. Such attacks, he said, were the final proof that genocide of Ukrainians is taking place. Zelensky then pointed the finger at every European, saying, "You saw, you know." Ukraine's human rights ombudsman, Lyudmila Denisova, has also denounced Russia for acts of genocide, honing in on a tank attack on an elderly care home in which 56 people died. This is another act of horrific genocide, the extermination of the civilian population of Ukraine, she said. A war crimes investigation is already underway by the International Criminal Court into Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The language Putin has used to describe Ukraine is frankly monstrous. In February, during his meeting with France's President Macron, Putin spoke directly of Ukraine, saying, "Like it or not, take it, my beauty." It's the language of rape. Putin is threatening Stalin-type purges and a new great terror against his own people if they are deemed traitors. With his army failing to achieve its aims of quickly crushing Ukraine, the Kremlin is increasing its assault on innocent people, hoping to break the country. There is intelligence that Putin plans another false flag operation, which would pave the way for Russia to use chemical or even biological or tactical nuclear weapons against Ukrainian civilians. Like Hitler before him, Putin is an international terrorist, capable of any atrocity now that his military has humiliated him. The West has stood by and watched genocide take place before. Just ask the dead of Rwanda or Bosnia. Hard though it may be to take our eyes from the atrocities in Ukraine, we, the West, are collectively standing by while genocide rears up across the world. In Myanmar, in Tigray, in China, rendering hopes of Xi Jinping abandoning his Russian ally for the West absurd and degrading. The Tigray region of Ethiopia is currently witness to some of the most barbaric war crimes on earth, and fears have been raised that the conflict is now degenerating into something akin to genocide. Where is the talk of Tigray? Why are we in the West silent on this war? In a rare act by a Western power, the Biden administration has just declared that the Myanmar military has committed genocide against the Rohingya minority. In China, there's a welter of evidence to accuse the Communist Party of carrying out genocide against the Muslim Uyghur community. On this crime, many nations in the West have spoken up. Parliaments in Canada, the Netherlands, Britain, Lithuania and France have all described China's actions as genocide. But what do kind words mean when your people are rounded up, your culture exterminated? Has our weak response to such sins emboldened Putin? Unwittingly exasperated atrocities in Ukraine? The world is stumbling blind into a new era. Russia has brought us to this point. The Ukrainian war likely won't remain confined to Ukraine. We are perhaps at the beginning of a conflict between democracy and authoritarianism, which will inevitably reshape the world. Just as we did in 1918 and 1945, once this conflict ends, for it will end one day, even though that day might be far away, we will need to find new ways of governing the world. After the First World War, the governments of the globe set up the weak and ineffectual League of Nations in the hope that it would act as a forum for discussion where peace would triumph over war. Hitler murdered the League of Nations. The United Nations was its successor after the Second World War. Who can say now that the UN is fit for purpose? It has failed and failed again. Its principal weakness is the Security Council, controlled by the victors of 1945, France, Britain, Russia, America, plus China. With such a divided membership, the UN can take no united decision. Clearly, if NATO intervenes to protect the Ukrainian people, we risk a nuclear Third World War. So, should UN peacekeepers not be mandated to step in, creating safe havens and humanitarian corridors, enforcing no-fly zones, placing themselves between soldiers and civilians? Russia couldn't go to war against the rest of the world in the shape of the United Nations. Who, quite literally on Earth, wouldn't see that as a workable solution? But it cannot happen, because the UN is a dark joke. After war, rubble has to be cleared and rebuilding must begin. When this conflict ends, whatever the historians may call it years from now, the UN should be part of the cleaning up exercise, and a new body created in its place, so we refashion how we govern this world in a way that's fit for the remainder of the 21st century. Our columns are a platform for writers to express their opinions. They do not necessarily represent the views of the Herald. This article was written by Neil Mackay. The Herald Scotland, Thursday 24th of March 2022. Voices. It won't be a city of culture, but it still has plenty to celebrate, by Teddy Jameson, Senior Features Writer. In the grand scheme of things, when Europe is at war and when Farage and his cronies are pushing back against zero carbon at a time when we've had heat waves at both the North and South Poles at the same time, Stirling's failure to meet the shortlist for the UK's City of Culture 2025 can be fairly labelled a disappointment rather than a disaster. Even so, when the news emerged at the weekend that the city had not been successful, it was deflating. Given that previously the UK City of Culture tag has already gone to Northern Ireland, with Derry Londonderry being the first to win back in 2013, and England with Hull in 2017, and Coventry playing host this year, you might well have thought that the Scottish and Welsh entrants might have been in with a strong shout for 2025. Well, the Welsh entrant, Wrexham County Borough, still is, but it will be up against Bradford, Southampton and County Durham. Not Stirling, unfortunately. It has fallen short, as Perth and Paisley did in the last competition. As a former resident of the fine city of Durham, I now hope that his bid comes out on top. If only so we can have a year-long celebration of the songwriting genius of Paddy McAloon. You can have that for free, County Durham. But the pressing question north of the border is, where does this leave Stirling now? How does it ensure that all the energy it has galvanised for the bid doesn't fizzle out? That's the challenge that celebrates the 20th anniversary of city status. There are examples to follow. Paisley has been impressive in forging ahead with its culture-led renaissance, mostly seen in its hosting of Unboxed at Paisley Abbey. The fact that it has been able to attract ALA, the architectural practice led by RIBA Stirling Prize winner, Amanda Levette, to take on the task of reconfiguring Paisley's museum is perhaps the most obvious proof of the town's ambition. But big infrastructure ideas are not the only option when it comes to culture. You can generate interest and excitement in a place via creative thinking and innovative ideas. At the weekend, I was lucky enough to attend the closing gala of the Hippodrome Silent Film Festival in Bowness. In just over 10 years, Falkirk Community Trust has managed to build up an international reputation for an event in a small town on the banks of the Forth. The result of smart thinking, not big thinking. Stirling is already home to two fine medium-sized venues in the Toll Booth and the recently revamped MacRobert Art Centre out on the university campus. It is the birthplace to Herald Scotland, the arts charity behind the Big Noise project that uses music education to help children in challenged communities. Every year it hosts the Bloody Scotland Crime Writing Festival, which brings a real buzz to the city centre. There's a sense in the city that at grassroots level it's forging ahead. So the basics are there. What it needs now is the desire to build on them. Hopefully the City of Culture bid, unsuccessful as it might have been, shows that the desire is already in place. This article was written by Teddy Jameson.
Herald Scotland recorded on Wednesday 23rd of March 2022. Arts and Entertainments. Ed Sheeran, George Harrison, The Jam, Kraftwerk, The Fear of Song Plagiarism by Mark Eady. Have you ever thought of a tune or a lyric and convinced yourself you'd come up with something unique? Are you like me, someone who has musical ditties in their head that meander like a restless wind inside a letterbox? As pleasurable as composing tunes can be, whether professionally or as an amateur, the fear of song plagiarism is never far away. In fact, any Beatles fans reading my opening paragraph would have instantly recognised my borrowing of the famous line from Across the Universe. But it proves just how easily it happens. A great phrase or melody you thought was all your own turns out to be someone else's instead. For any tunesmith worth his or her salt, it must be their biggest dread, and highly embarrassing. Not only have you nicked the idea, whether by accident or by design, you weren't even smart enough to either notice it or hide it. As the old saying goes, where there's a hit, there's a writ, an industry term Ed Sheeran, who is currently embroiled in a legal tussle over his song Shape of You, will know all too well. The Halifax-born star isn't the first, and won't be the last musician forced to defend himself against accusations of theft, or, to use the proper legal parlance, breaching copyright rules, which he denies. Probably the most famous case of copyright infringement involved George Harrison, when he was sued for the similarity of My Sweet Lord to the Chiffon's He's So Fine. The judge ruled the former Beatle had copied the song through the process of cryptomnesia, a form of subconscious recollection. But there's this thin line between legitimate borrowing, reworking and reimagining, all tenets of the creative process, and outright theft. Examples where inspiration has been drawn from those before them aren't difficult to find. The Beatles' Taxman / The Jam's Start, or the Beach Boys' Barbara Ann / Kraftwerk's Autobahn, to name but a few. Indeed, rock behemoths Led Zeppelin made a career out of blatant musical swipes. However, what those bands brought to the songs mentioned above was their own mood and spirit that a simple examination of the sheet music wouldn't convey. Harrison's song, although melodically similar, had entirely different words and feel, different enough in my opinion. This raises the question, is there such thing as a truly original thought? Is there a little bit of magpie in all of us? I mean, how many different ways can someone sing about love? And there must be millions of occasions where heart and apart are rhymed. The 1-4-5 chord progression is the bedrock of Western popular music, and as Noel Gallagher, who himself would admit his debt to the Fab Four, said, there's 12 notes in a scale and 36 chords, and that's the end of it. All the configurations have been done before. But there are two sides to every vinyl record. On the one hand, for any songwriter whose work has clearly fallen prey to the sticky fingers of rock gods, hip-hop samplers, pop acts, or whoever, the courts may be the only recourse. On the other, there's also a danger that a money-driven, litigious culture will stifle creativity. Indeed, so traumatised was Harrison by the experience that he lived in fear of accidentally copying another artist. There's no hard and fast rule. A writer must be true to their talent and follow the muse wherever it takes them, while acknowledging the source of that inspiration. As a certain Liverpudlian once sang, "Hey Jude, don't make it bad. Take a sad song and make it better." Our columns are a platform for writers to express their opinions. They do not necessarily represent the views of the Herald. by Mark Eady. Herald Scotland recorded on Thursday 24th of March 2022. Arts and Entertainments. MTV 80s and MTV 90s launch. Does Anyone Else Feel Old? By Susan Swarbrick, columnist and senior features writer. Brace yourself for a blast from the past as MTV launches 2 new nostalgia-stoking UK music channels on March 31. According to the network, the unveiling of MTV 80s and MTV 90s will provide a dedicated home for era-defining hits across all genres. Can you explain era-defining, please? Well, it would appear to be a polite stroke politically correct way of saying getting on a bit. Let's rewind for a moment. That's the spirit. You're catching on now. The new channels will play chart toppers from the 1980s and 1990s, which some, chiefly me, might argue are the decades that gave us the best music of all time. Why the shake-up? A statement from MTV reads, "We have made these changes to reflect our audience's current viewing patterns, and it means we are saying goodbye to our MTV Classic and MTV Base brands. Since its launch in 1999, MTV Base has been a fantastic platform for introducing and establishing some of the biggest acts in R&B, rap, grime and more into UK contemporary culture at a time when these genres were still considered niche. Music of black origin now holds a broad appeal for a variety of fans across the UK, so we have refined our music channels to reflect how these genres have been integrated into mainstream playlists more generally. How will it work? MTV says that contemporary black music and artists will continue to be showcased on its flagship channel MTV Music, as well as MTV Hits. The network is also bringing back Yo! MTV Raps, rated as a bi-weekly show. Early 21st century content from MTV Base, aka the noughties and 2010s, will find a new home in MTV Hits, while old school 1990s content will move to the MTV 90s channel, which promises to showcase a golden age of R&B and hip-hop. Why do the 1980s and 1990s need their own channels? Because, put simply, they are the best decades, but also they are now considered retro-vintage-old tunes. Some millennials and Gen Z regard the 1980s and 1990s with the same dewy-eyed fondness as Gen X did the 1950s and 1960s. Lest we forget, time is marching on. The Battle of Britpop, Blur versus Oasis, was almost 27 years ago, and the fierce rivalries of the New Romantics when Spandau Ballet jousted with Duran Duran. Closer to 40 years now. Oh, and it's a quarter of a century since the Spice Girls gave their memorable performance at the 1997 Brit Awards. Yikes, I do feel old. True, then again, who needs central heating when you have the halcyon glow of the good old days to keep you warm at night? By Susan Swarbrick.
From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 28th of March 2022, from the sports section, Luis Figo reveals gratitude towards Rangers legend Paul Gascoigne and hails Ibrox experience. By Christopher Jack, senior Rangers writer. The embraces were prolonged and heartfelt. The admiration and respect was mutual between Luis Figo and Paul Gascoigne. In their pomp, they were two very different players. In retirement, they are two very different characters. But the relationship between bona fide legends was clear to see on Saturday as some of the greatest names in the game strutted their stuff at Ibrox. Figo would lead his World 11 side to a 3-2 victory over a Rangers squad that included the likes of Giovanni van Bronckhorst, Barry Ferguson and George Alberts. It was the appearance of Gaza that sparked the biggest roar from an impressive 38,000 strong crowd, though, as he marked his return to Glasgow with a goal and a typical showman cameo. The end result, of course, didn't matter in a game that was part of Rangers' 150th anniversary celebrations. But the day meant a lot to Figo as he was reunited with an old friend. "I have known Paul a long time," Figo said. "He was very kind with me when I was starting and also during my career. We also met off the pitch in Portugal in the summer, and I asked him to be part of some project I had in that time in my photo book. So I know him well, and I'm pleased that he is healthy and he has recuperated from what he was passing through. I was very pleased to see him, and I was very happy to spend time with him. That is the spirit of ex-professional players. It is in your blood that you want to win. Even if it is a friendly or charity game, you run because you want to get a result. In the end, we know the result is not the most important thing, but when you're on the pitch, you forget everything and you want to perform your best. That should be the spirit with respect to the people who have come to watch this football game. Figo was joined by Champions League winners and World Cup heroes, as goals from Carlos Marchena, Nuno Gomes and Ricardo Quaresma clinched victory for the World 11. The likes of Georgie Hagi, Roy Mackay and Kaká also pulled on their boots, as the Rangers Charity Foundation and Luis Figo Foundation benefited financially from the cash raised on an enjoyable afternoon at Ibrox. Figo said, "It was a fantastic experience for me and it was a great day. It was great to have the chance to be in a full stadium with a great atmosphere. It's not every day you get the chance to come back after so long and play in front of a full stadium. That was very emotional. I'm also very thankful to Glasgow Rangers to give us the chance to raise some pounds for our projects while also celebrating the anniversary of this historic club. I feel quite emotional and I want to say thank you to everyone, including the players who joined my team. These kind of events, they come for free, and in this period of life, we are passing through so many things. I am very happy." Fans were given the chance to welcome back heroes of yesteryear, and it was a day for families to gather as the sun shone and legends of the game showed that class is permanent. And former Barcelona, Real Madrid and Inter Milan superstar Figo was grateful for the support that his own charity received as he seeks to make a difference in the next stage of his life. Figo said, "It was a great opportunity. I am very thankful for the opportunity to raise funds for our projects. These days it is very difficult, not only for my foundation, but in general to get funds because everyone knows what is happening in the world. We will try to channel these funds to the different projects and the different areas that we work in, like health, sport and social integration. It is very nice to have that chance." And that was an article by Christopher Jack.
The Herald, Tuesday the 29th of March 2022. News. 8 Glasgow statues singled out for links to slave trade, report revealed. This article is by Deborah Anderson. 8 Glasgow statues of individuals with connections to the slave trade have been singled out by a new report. It added gifts from those linked to the trade amounted to more than £300 million in today's valuation, and it said that while other cities and institutions around the UK have apologised for their connections to the slave trade, the city lags behind in civic recognition. It noted there was also a muted response in Glasgow in contrast with other Atlantic ports. In 2007, the bicentennial of the abolition of the Slave Trade Act was marked. Council leader Susan Aitken said the city needs to respond, adding, "We should apologise fully and unreservedly to the descendants of enslaved people." Commissioned by Glasgow City Council, the purpose of the Glasgow Slavery Audit was to determine the historic connections and modern legacies derived from the Atlantic slave trade. The study, led by Dr. Stephen Mullen, academic historian at the University of Glasgow, focused on individuals who were residents of Glasgow and elsewhere involved with Atlantic slavery between 1603 and 1838. Some of these individuals shaped today's city, whilst others are memorialised in civic space, including 8 statues which were erected around the city. 8 statues of Colin Campbell, William Gladstone, John Moore, David Livingstone, James Oswald, Robert Peel Jr., James Watt, and King William are all highlighted in the report. Glasgow City Council leader Susan Aitken said the report provides an evidence base of the extent of Glasgow's complicity in chattel slavery and the actions that supported it. She added, "This issue now is how we respond as a city. A working group with a remit to propose and take forward recommendations from the report will reconvene following May's local elections. This would include matters from street names, monuments and buildings with direct or associated connections to Atlantic slavery, Lord Provosts of Glasgow who were involved in the slave economy, through to how Glasgow should permanently acknowledge the city's historic role in slavery and memorialise its victims. All recommendations will be subjected to consultation particularly with groups representing BAME citizens, and we should apologise fully and unreservedly to the descendants of enslaved people and to the nations they came from for the city's significant role in Atlantic slavery. Among the key findings are that between 1636 and 1834, 79 individual Lord Provosts were nominated to Glasgow Town Council, with 40 having some connection to Atlantic slavery, and some sat in office whilst owning enslaved people. It found Glasgow Town Council invested £1,812, around £4 million today, in the Company of Scotland in 1696. Company of Scotland ships later trafficked enslaved people from Madagascar in the Indian Ocean. A minimum of 11 existing mansions and urban buildings in Glasgow have been found to be connected to individuals linked to slavery, and funding for the city chambers in the 1880s was derived from municipal incomes, whilst occasionally borrowing from banks with previous connections to the Atlantic slavery economy, such as the British Linen Bank. Delayed in its publication due to access to archives during the pandemic, Dr. Mullen acknowledges that the audit of a city's history of Atlantic commerce and slavery was undertaken in a challenging period for researchers in general and archive-led historians. The report states the named statues have direct connections to Africa trafficking. King William, whose monument is near Cathedral Square, was a shareholder in the Royal African Company, while James Watt, inventor and steam engineer improver, was involved with colonial commerce in Glasgow in the 1750s and 1760s, including the trafficking of a black child named only as Frederick. Others inherited slavery-derived wealth and promoted the interests of enslavers in the British Parliament. MPs William Ewart, Gladstone and James Oswald inherited wealth from forebears with major connections to the Atlantic slavery economy. In different ways, Gladstone and Oswald, as well as Robert Peel Jr., supported the interests of enslavers in Parliament, although Oswald nominally supported the end of the apprenticeship scheme by signing a public petition in 1836. John Moore and Colin Campbell, whose statues are both found in George Square, were in the British Army with identifiable roles in upholding the system of chattel slavery in colonies of the British West Indies. Missionary and explorer David Livingstone was employed in Blantyre Mill, owned by Henry Monteith, who was in a partnership with two Glasgow West India merchants in the 1810s. Blantyre Mill paid relatively high wages to its workforce, including Livingstone from 1823 and especially after 1832, when he was promoted to a cotton spinner, which funded his education. Although outside the scope of this study, one street in Glasgow commemorates an abolitionist. Fox Street was named after Whig politician Charles James Fox, 1749 to 1806, a parliamentary campaigner who supported abolition in the 1790s. Fox was a close ally of William Wilberforce and was widely recognised for his parliamentary efforts. At a meeting on the 5th of April 1792, the London Committee for the Abolition of the Slave Trade thanked William Wilberforce, William Pitt and Charles James Fox for their parliamentary contributions, although abolition was not enacted until 1807. The report also highlighted street names and found that 62 Glasgow street names and locations have a direct or associational connection to Atlantic slavery. These include Buchanan Street, named after Andrew Buchanan Jr., Glassford Street, after tobacco lord John Glassford, and Monteith Row, named after Henry Monteith. The report refers to cities across the UK and beyond which have apologised for slave trade connections, it added. The paradox is that while historical research focused on Glasgow and slavery-related themes is now relatively well known, and its political leadership and citizenry are in an informed position, the city lags behind in civic recognition. It said of all Britain's Atlantic outports, Glasgow has arguably the most well-developed body of historical writing that explains the implications of the colonial era from the city's early 18th century sugar returnees, mid-18th century slaving voyages, the eras of the tobacco lords, 1740 to 1790, and sugar aristocracy, 1790 to 1838. The report added, whilst historians have addressed key aspects of Liverpool and Bristol's history, notably in the Africa trafficking, there are multiple perspectives of Glasgow and its citizens' connections with Atlantic slavery. The report is due to be delivered to members of Glasgow City Council later this week. Glasgow City Council was contacted for comment. This article is by Deborah Anderson. The Herald, Monday the 28th of March 2022, News. Scottish Labour fury over £2 million SNP gravy train. This article is by Kathleen Nutt. Almost 100 people sit on multiple public bodies across Scotland, raking in more than £2 million a year between them, according to a new audit. The analysis found that many of the Quango appointments, which usually involve just a handful of days of work a month, were rewarded with an average salary of more than £22,300 per role, with the highest wage reaching £130,500 for 2 board roles. Among these, there are 34 professional non-executive directors whose only employment seems to be board membership. 8 directors sit on 3 or more boards, often with little policy connection between each board. A high number of the appointees were also local councillors. Organisations included in the analysis include health boards, the Care Inspectorate, the Crofton Commission, the Cairngorman, the Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Parks, and Food Standards Scotland. They also include a number of cultural bodies such as Creative Scotland. Ministers say the boards play a vital role in the delivery of public services. Scottish Labour, which carried out the research, accused the SNP of handling millions of pounds to people effectively working as professional public board members. Daniel Johnson, the party spokesman for Economy and Finance, said there are a jaw-dropping number of people earning full-time salaries for a few days' work on the SNP gravy train. When people in public services are all crying out for help, every single penny of public money must be spent wisely. But instead, high-paid executives are being handed thousands of pounds for doing the boardroom merry-go-round under the SNP. Specialist advice is essential, but the SNP are stripping these experts of their independence by putting more and more of them on the government payroll. The SNP are letting cronyism run riot, and it is taxpayers footing the bill for these eye-watering payments. We cannot keep wasting millions of pounds on talking shops. Scottish Labour have a real plan to spend money where it's really needed and build a stronger economy. The audit found 93 people had multiple appointments on Quangos. The total cost of all repeat board members was £2.1 million. A Scottish Government spokesperson said public bodies play an essential role in delivery of crucial public services everyone relies on. The public sector benefits from the skills, knowledge, expertise, experience, perspectives and commitment of board members. The Scottish Government and its agencies are operating a wider range of responsibilities than ever before in a changing political landscape, whilst delivering value for money for the people of Scotland and protecting public services. This article is by Kathleen Nutt. The Herald, Monday the 28th of March 2022, News. Tories urge SNP justice rethink as 1 crime in 8 committed by person on bail. This article is by Tom Gordon. More than 30,000 crimes, including 29 murders and culpable homicides, were committed by people out on bail in just 3 years in Scotland. Official figures released under Freedom of Information show around 1 crime in every 8 was committed by someone on bail between 2017-18 and 2019-20. The Scottish Conservatives, who obtained the data, said it showed the folly of the Scottish Government's plans to increase the use of bail instead of remanding suspects in jail. The government is currently consulting on proposed changes to bail and release from custody arrangements, including earlier automatic release for some prisoners. The new Freedom of Information figures show a total of 31,211 crimes were committed from 2017 to 18 to 2019 to 20, the latest years for which details are available while out on bail. These include 29 convictions for murder or homicide, 19 cases of rape, and 557 attempted murders or serious assaults. The most frequent crimes were breach of the peace, shoplifting, and common assault. The Tories argue the current Scottish Government consultation would, if put into effect, make it easier for courts to grant bail to those accused of crimes by making the refusal of bail dependent on public safety grounds, limiting the options for courts. Scotland's judiciary have also criticised a proposal to let long-term prisoners apply for parole after serving a third of their sentence, instead of the current halfway point. Tory MSP Jamie Green said these figures show the risk of letting dangerous criminals back onto our streets. It is shocking to see such a consistently high proportion of crimes being committed by those who were supposed to be monitored. It is clear the current arrangements for monitoring those on bail are inadequate. Yet, instead of toughening up bail arrangements, the SNP shockingly want to make it even easier for judges to use bail, despite the fact criminals find it so easy to ignore their bail conditions by going on to commit thousands of crimes every year, including murder. Scotland's top judges are already concerned that the SNP are tying their hands in decision-making with the further watering down of sentences via early release. They rightly point out that we are at serious risk of losing public confidence in our justice system. I urge the SNP government to ditch these proposals immediately, otherwise public safety will be put at even greater risk. In its consultation, the government proposed an end to the requirement to deny bail if an accused was believed to be a flight risk, instead focusing on the dangers an accused presents to the community. The document said denying bail on the basis of fears the accused will not appear in court is focused on the efficient operation of the justice system as opposed to public safety. While accepting there is obvious merit to ensure the justice system runs smoothly, the document said there needed to be a balance struck against the negative impact of undue use of remand, given what is known about the disruptiveness of short periods of custody and, in this context, deprivation of liberty being imposed on those not convicted of any offence. This article is by Tom Gordon.
From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 28th of March 2022, from the sports section, stats show Celtic are real winners in Rangers' away allocation decision. Monday kick-off by James Morgan. England should give up their World Cup spot for Ukraine. Friday brings the draw for the Qatar World Cup and, with it, a number of imponderables. It will be the first finals in which some of the participants will not be known, including Scotland of course. With war in Ukraine, COVID-19 and unresolved qualification campaigns, all providing explanations for why the identities of all 32 teams will remain incomplete. It will throw up further incongruities, such as the placing of Portugal in Pot 1 should they successfully navigate their way past North Macedonia in the Path C playoff match tomorrow evening. FIFA made the announcement last week that seeds would be determined based on world rankings, but there seems to be something inherently unfair in placing teams that finished second in the group and came through a playoff taking up a number 1 seeding place, when others, such as Germany, Denmark, Netherlands and Mexico, actually won theirs. Then there is Ukraine. Boris Johnson had a novel solution to the problem when he suggested that the war-torn country should just be handed the berth that 2 countries under the UK government are vying for. It was a theme picked up by at least one English journalist last week when he argued that either Wales or Scotland should merely step aside and hand Ukraine them their qualification spot. Perhaps should they draw England and Qatar, then Gareth Southgate will do the honourable thing and give Ukraine the points. Better still, let's just hand them the trophy now. Such daftness prompted a petition launched by a few wags who countered with the suggestion that England, an enclave for Russian funny money after all, should hand over their place instead, since Wales' last World Cup appearance came in 1958 and Scotland's in 1998, while England tend to qualify every year. Hard to imagine the Football Association, which has a turnover of £500 million each year, willingly forgoing the £10 million prize money of reaching the World Cup. Much like the Scottish Football Association or the Football Association of Wales then. Money for president. Speaking of imbecilic Johnson, how long is it before we can rid him from the House of Commons again? 2 years? Pah. Perhaps Andy Murray will continue to hone his sharp political put-downs in time for Johnson's surely inevitable denouement. Politics and sport don't mix, Johnson likes to tell us, of course. Except when they do. Sebastian Coe was a Tory minister for many years. Alec Douglas-Hume, the ill-fated Conservative Prime Minister, was a first-class cricketer, while Chris Chataway, another long-distance runner, was yet another Tory minister and, well, frankly, the list of such is endless. So what chance out of Randy? Well, like one of his chairman forehands down the line, he certainly didn't miss when it came to commenting in a tweet quoting Rishi Sunak as he addressed the Commons during Tuesday's budget, in which he suggested that only the Conservatives can be trusted with public money. To which Murray replied, LOL, didn't the Conservative Prime Minister spend tens of thousands of taxpayers' money in gold wallpaper that keeps falling down? Tarjovsky, the Macedonian phrase for déjà vu. Do Italians have a phrase for déjà vu? That was the overwhelming question when the Azzurri's second successive failure to reach the World Cup finals materialised last week, but it wasn't the only matter fans were rubbing their eyes at. Sports scientists say that visualisation and repetition are clear techniques that can improve the performance of a player, and there was no better representation of that theory when Alexandro Tarjovsky lashed in North Macedonia's winner against Italy on Thursday evening. Tarjovsky clearly felt right at home in Palermo's La Favorita Stadium. He had, after all, spent 4 years as a midfielder with the Sicilian club, where he played 104 times and scored 16 goals. 3 of those strikes began circulating on social media in the hours after North Macedonia's stunning victory, and each bore an uncanny resemblance to the one that Tarjovsky scalped past Gigi Donnarumma to end Italy's hopes of qualification for Qatar. Italy out in the football, but let's keep them in the rugby. It's been a week of condescending head-patting for the Italian rugby team in the aftermath of their Six Nations victory over Wales last weekend. As noted in last Monday's column, the Azzurri managed something Scotland could not, and have hopefully shelved talk of banishing them from the competition. The fear is that money will talk, of course, and the greatest test in Northern Hemisphere rugby will soon be bastardised to include an interloper in the form of South Africa, all with the intention of lining the pockets of the home unions. But there should be less haste and less speed to replace Italy. Listen to Paolo Garbisi, the man who kicked the winning conversion after Eduardo Padovani's mesmeric try, who said at the weekend, "It's really important that we consider this a point of departure rather than a point of arrival. Quite honestly, I don't want to be winning one game every 7 years. I want to win lots of games with Italy, as many as possible. With such conviction, it would be grossly unfair to jettison Italy from the tournament. Consider, too, that Italy's under-20s, for whom Garbisi's brother Alessandro plays, finished their Six Nations campaign with 3 victories. Yes, and of course, one of those included a thumping 27-13 win over Scotland. Celtic will benefit most from return of fans. It's Rangers v Celtic this week, and that can mean only one thing: endless discussions about whether the old firm is dead or not. Rather than become embroiled in the debate though, the Monday kick-off is going to focus instead on the importance of home advantage. It's the first time Celtic supporters will be allowed into Ibrox since 2019, albeit there will be a mere 700 in attendance, with preference given to supporters who missed out on the COVID-cancelled Premiership fixture in March 2020. Rangers cited at the time of the decision to make allocation cuts in 2018 that it was to meet season ticket holder demand for the fixture, but the suspicion has always been that the Ibrox side that implemented the policy in order to give themselves a competitive advantage after a run of 5 successive home defeats by Celtic in the fixture. It has diminished the spectacle as a result, not least since most of the appeal for the match is the unique atmosphere that it throws up due to the presence of both sets of supporters being in attendance. COVID has played its part in a lack of Celtic and Rangers fans at the homes of their respective rivals, but the decision has certainly had an impact on results too, with it favouring Rangers more than Celtic. The latter have won just once at Ibrox since the introduction of the cap on tickets. 79. The record points tally accrued by Peterhead in winning the League 2 title in 2018-19. Kelty Hearts, who won the division on Saturday, need just 8 points to break the record. However, even if the fight was well to win all 5 of the remaining matches, they would still fall short of the 4th tier record of 98 set by Gretna in 2004-05. And that was the Monday kick-off by James Morgan.
Herald Scotland recorded on Monday 28th of March 2022. Arts and Entertainments. Orphans. Robert Florence and Cora Bissett on new NTS musical by Teddy Jameson, senior features writer. It began with a small idea to do something big. Writer, director, actor and one-time musician Cora Bissett was talking to Jackie Wiley, director of the National Theatre of Scotland, about the possibility of doing a musical. But which one? Something intrinsically Scottish, Bissett thought. It's not just let's put on Hairspray, what's our musical? She asked herself. She began reading classic Scottish novels and watching familiar Scottish films, trying to find the story that could work. She dismissed most of them. What she began to think is the cult classic that speaks to me and to a lot of other people. And that's when she thought about Peter Mullen's film Orphans. His directorial debut, released in the UK at the end of the 1990s and starring Gary Lewis and Douglas Henshaw, alongside Rosemary Stevenson and Stephen McCall. I've always been a big fan of Peter Mullen's work, Bissett says now. I loved Orphans when it came out. It's got that incredibly dark humour that I think is culturally a part of us. Enormous heart, even though practically every character is ridiculously emotionally oppressed. It has got enormous soul, and even just watching it again, I think it's incredibly theatrical. I think you're watching a great realist drama, then it goes off, and you realise you're in a very different magical realist territory. You have roofs blowing off churches, you have a man floating down the Clyde in a pallet. It's poetic, and it lifts, and it soars, and I just thought, oh, we could really have fun with this. And that's why years after Bissett first had that small idea, we're here this morning in Rock Villa, NTS's headquarters in Glasgow, just under a month before opening night, with a stage full of actors dancing around a waltzer led by movement director Vicky Manderson and her assistant Jade Adamson, while Bissett watches on. The world has changed between idea and its realisation. This is a show that should have appeared a year ago, but the pandemic ruined that plan. Right now, Bissett and her team are hoping it doesn't get in the way of opening night. This morning there are 2 actors off with COVID. Fortunately, there are alternative arrangements, understudies in place, which you normally wouldn't have in Scottish theatre, Bissett explains. All my contemporaries have grown up in an era where you just don't get sick. It's doctor theatre. Very few of us have ever missed shows in our lives. You just go on, come rain or shine. But obviously we're living in very different times, and so, even when people don't feel unwell, they have to isolate. Everyone is understudying to some extent, and probably wetting their pants at the thought. Manderson and Adamson run the cast through their paces. Over the course of a couple of hours, I watch as technical details are transformed into flowing movement. The magic of theatre. Meanwhile, Robert Florence, star of Burniston and the Scots, and Rab to everyone at Rock Villa, is sitting at the back of the rehearsal room, not needed just at the moment. Florence may have been a member of a youth theatre group in Springburn as a teenager, but being the main man in an all-singing, all-dancing Glasgow musical is not what he's used to. It's a completely new experience for me, he admits. When you come from TV comedy, you may have an idea in your head that theatre is really serious, but if anything, it's really playful. It's hard work, we do warm-ups in the morning and it's really physical. That's been a wee bit of a shock to the system. It's a nice way to start your day, everybody exercising, playing some games to get yourself awake. On telly, you turn up for your call time, you get your makeup on, you get your costume on, you step on set, you do it, you go home. There's no readjustment time where you can get warmed up, make sure everyone's in a good place and then do the work. It's completely alien to me, but really nice. He already seems very at home. Why did he want to get involved? Mainly because I absolutely love the film. When my agent told me about it, I was like, aye, definitely. I'm 100% interested. Not like I've had any real clamouring to do theatre stuff. It's more that I would have been gutted if this would have happened and I hadn't been involved in some capacity, because I think the film is a masterpiece, man. I love Peter Mullen's stuff. I love the films that he makes. I think he's hugely underrated filmmaker in this country. The guy's a genius. Florence hasn't watched the movie since he landed the role as Tommy. I don't want to look at Gary Lewis's performance. He's so brilliant in it, so I don't want to look at it. We just need to be our own thing. Orphans, for those who don't remember or haven't seen it, is the story of 4 grown-up Glasgow children who are mourning their late mother on the eve of her funeral while a storm approaches. Bissett and her team are now transforming that story into a big showy musical, which requires Florence to sing, of course. I've always sang a lot. I walk along the house singing to myself, so it's not so much that. It's knowing how to use your voice, how to protect your voice, he says. We auditioned him on Zoom, Bissett recalls. We sent him down a song and he just nailed it. We were in bits when he performed this song. He can do that repressed emotion, but you can tell that there's such a gentleness and vulnerability there as well. He doesn't milk it, it's just there. And when he opens his mouth to sing, oh my god, there's a heart the size of a planet that just comes out. And that's exactly what we wanted. We wanted the repression, but the song allows us to see what's underneath it all. That's just a joy. Yes, the songs, they're the work of Roddy Hart and Tommy Riley, working with playwright Douglas Maxwell, who has written the book for the musical. Hart is best known as a singer and broadcaster, but with Riley has been writing music for films and TV for a number of years now, including the songs for the Scottish zombie rom-com Anna and the Apocalypse, as well as Our Ladies and Animaniacs for Hulu, brackets winning an Emmy for the latter, close brackets. Orphans, Hart says, was a chance to do a Scottish musical that is not apologetic in any way, but it's widescreen and open-hearted and speaks in a Scottish voice. That was the attraction for us, which is maybe a good time as any to bring up the elephant in the room. Musical theatre. It's not pop, it's not classical, and all too often it's not as good as either. Is it? Or is that just me? It's only at home I hate it, says Maxwell. When I'm in the theatre, I think this is total theatre. Together, what was exciting was we were all into music, as well as liking musical theatre, he continues. Just talking about that bit in West Side Story. It was talking about that bit in Hats by the Blue Nile. Quite a lot of the time when I work with people in musical theatre, they can talk about that sound in Waitress, but they can't talk about Loveless by My Bloody Valentine, and I need both. But I think people who love musical theatre are going to love the music in this, but if you don't like it, I still think you'll like it. That's a bit like Born in a Storm from Raintown. Too much of the other way. If it's just Loveless, you're playing to 14 people. Hart doesn't think musical theatre needs any defence. For me, a good song is a good song. If it's well written, if it's crafted, and in musical theatre, when it's good, it's been crafted, it's undeniably brilliant. There's a reason why Tom Waits does a cover of Somewhere from West Side Story, one of the best songs of all time. That said, writing a song and writing a song for a musical are very different challenges. What he and Riley have had to learn over the years is how to advance the story in song. If it doesn't serve the character, if it doesn't serve the story, then you're dead. But that's the fun part, suggests Riley. That's the bit we've become addicted to. It's like a puzzle, a solvable problem. Also musically, there's total freedom. You can do things in a musical song that you wouldn't do in a song for an album. And the result? It is a musical, but it's for people who don't like musicals, Hart suggests. It's Rodgers and Hammerstein with a lot more swearing in it, Maxwell adds. He starts to speak a line from the script. Apologies if I've been somewhat blunt. Hart smiles as he lets me work out the rhyme. We definitely go there. Rab Florence's relationship to the form is a simple one. I absolutely love musicals. I love all that jazz. I love cabaret. When I grew up, my mum and my dad were much older than me. He laughs at his own words. Obviously they were my parents, but they were much older than normal parents. As a result, he says, I kind of grew up in musicals, and comedy musicals. My dad even loved the Bob Hope, Bing Crosby Road films. I've always loved musicals, so being in one is great. For him, he has realised the real challenge is not the singing or knowing which part of the stage is upstage and which downstage, brackets, he's still having to ask, close brackets, but the emotions that this show taps into. As fun as it is, it's also really sad, and when your parents are dead, it's even sadder. It's tough. My parents were alive when I first saw the film. I said this to Peter Bullen the other day when he was in. I said I loved it, but my parents were alive. As much as I loved it, I didn't completely get it. I suppose I had a wee bit of disconnect with the surrealism and the heightened nature of it. When I was younger, I thought that was a stylistic choice, but now, having been through the experience, it is such a surreal time, and you go off the rails. I went through all of that after my ma died, and so I get it much more now, I would say. If you Google my name, there's a story about a pub called Box in Sauchiehall Street, and I ended up waking up in Box, sitting in a toilet cubicle, and the pub was shut and I was locked in. I managed to play it off. My default is, I'll make it into a funny thing, but my ma died the week before. I was completely hammered in Box that night. I was upset and messaging people on the phone and fell asleep in the cubicle. That was me in the total throes of grief. I didn't say to anybody my ma had just died. It's the one thing I didn't say which really explains that kind of stuff. The show is about that kind of night. The horrible thing about it is, it's not just a night. He tells me a story about sitting in rehearsals with fellow actor Paul McCall, brackets, whose brother Stephen was in the original film, close brackets. The two of us were greeted at the songs. Florence's mum died 6 years ago, but rehearsing for the show, he's realised he's still processing her loss. It's an ongoing process. It's still there because when I'm doing the show, I can just feel it. And maybe in these not quite post-pandemic times, we can all feel a little of that. It's so funny, agrees Bissett. Stories take on different resonances for the times you're living in. No one foresaw the pandemic coming, but actually as we're living through it, Jackie texted me, "Oh my God, Orphans has become really prescient now." Because it is about grief and many people have lived through a literal experience of that, losing loved ones, not even being able to be with them at the end, and the horror of that and the absurdity we've all lived with. But also, a lot of people have lost their businesses, relationships have split, the amount of people moving home, the mental health, all these slower aftershock effects of the pandemic, I think resonate in this piece as well. It's absolutely a fun night out, but I think in the room on various numbers, particularly when Rab is singing, he sings beautifully, I think he will wow people. We're all in bits. And then we're laughing next minute. It just pulls you from pillar to post. It's just a very human story of our times right now. Whatever your grief is, whatever you have lost over these past 2 years, I think it will speak to you. But it's also a story of quiet hope. Peter Mullen has never one for great sentimentality and has given me strict orders. Don't know if I will totally follow that to the word. You can have both. In Peter's film, and the family is ripped apart through the film, but they do come back together quietly. It's not a big Disney woo, but it's a more Scottish way of forward movement. Bloody Heart agrees. There is a collective trauma emerging. There's an added weight that's in there, and we probably brought a lot of that baggage to it by the fact of when we were doing it. In a way, it kind of saved us over the last few years. We hope just a little bit of that will be transferred to audiences who might feel some kind of recognition factor or comfort in watching it. We're back to the idea of Doctor Theatre, and not just for the performers. I've been to a few plays and I think audiences now are leaning into it. They're wanting it, says Douglas Maxwell. And I think this show is so big and it's so, I hate saying it's good, it doesn't feel natural coming out of my mouth, but there's something about this, I think they'll come. And I think it will give them something really powerful. This is really unapologetic. This is a big set, huge cast. It's subsidised theatre at its best. A commercial company couldn't take a risk on something like Orphans. National Theatre Scotland can come in and say, there's an audience for this. A big Scottish audience is going to connect to this. Let's risk it. Orphans is a risk. Orphans is a musical for people who might not like musicals. Orphans started out as a small idea, but if it works it will blossom into a great big affirmative. A celebration of theatre and a celebration of life. That's worth taking a chance on. Orphans opens at the Beacon Arts Centre, Greenock in April 1 and continues in April 2, then transfers to SEC Armadillo, Glasgow, April 6, April 9. King's Theatre, Edinburgh, April 12 to April 16, and Eden Court, Inverness, April 26 to April 30. By Teddy Jameson.
From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 28th of March 2022, from the sports section. An association like that can take over your life. Chris Erskine thrilled to join Thistle's Hall of Fame. By James Kearney, sports writer. Chris Erskine finally has his happy ending at Partick Thistle, and there are few who could begrudge him it. The 35-year-old, who's enjoyed 4 playing stints at Firhill across 12 years, has been a central figure in the club's recent history. After being plucked from the juniors, Erskine was there as the Jags won the First Division title in 2013. He was there when the Maryhill outfit achieved their highest league finish in decades, as they sealed 6th place in the Premiership in 2017, and he was there the following year as the team suffered the heartbreak of relegation. He was there during Gary Caldwell's ill-fated tenure as Thistle manager, and even last year, when the Jags found themselves in the 3rd tier and promotion seemed a distant prospect, there was Erskine, determined as ever to play any role he could to help the team. Those efforts spanning over a decade have been rewarded. Erskine, now training to be a fireman but still hoping to continue playing in some capacity, is the latest former player to be inducted into Partick Thistle's Hall of Fame. It's a massive honour, he says. To get inducted into the Hall of Fame is a massive honour for any player, and it's the pinnacle, really. It's the best thing that can happen to you. I'm over the moon about it. Medals and stuff like that are nice, but something like this, the guys that are already in the Hall of Fame are part of the fabric of the club. To have your name in the same place as them and to be thought of in the same way as guys like John Lambie and Chick Charnley definitely makes it a wee bit more special. It's something that can't be taken away from you. You're in the club's history books, and if you had said that to me when I first signed for Thistle, I would have laughed at you. An association like that can take over your life. It's not just you that buys into it, it's your family as well. Even now, when I wasn't at the club previously, my family will still text me asking if I've seen the Thistle score. I had a few spells away and came back again, but getting inducted into the Hall of Fame means that association never ends. I had to leave when Gary Caldwell was there, and never left on my own terms. So, when I got the opportunity last year, I thought I'd be able to do it on my own terms and end it in a good light. Then I ruptured my hamstring, which was an even worse end to it. Leaving the club that way, ending my association with it, was kind of devastating. But the thing with this is, that means that my association with the club will never end, and that's amazing. As Erskine, who has nearly 300 Thistle first team appearances to his name, alludes to, his induction brings with it a sense of closure. For someone who has departed the club 4 times, only once, his initial move to Dundee United, could have been said to be made on his terms. And, even then, the supporters weren't exactly enthralled at the prospect of their best player leaving for a divisional rival and giving him an especially cheery send-off. Erskine's second stint ended with a loan deal reaching its conclusion. The third occurred when he had fallen out of favour under Caldwell and was unceremoniously shoved out the back door, and the fourth, which arrived last season, was perhaps the most painful of all. A few minutes into a second appearance from the bench after joining the club on loan for the second half of the campaign, the playmaker picked up a season-ending injury. I got the chance to come back last year, and I thought a few months to try and help the club win the league and play a few games would have been a good end. I'd have been happy with that. But obviously things are taken out of your hands when you get an injury like the one I got, Erskine explained. Thistle won the league anyway, and that's the main thing, but it would have been nice to play a bigger part in it and get a medal. Getting inducted kind of makes up for that, but I would have liked one last chance to play in front of the crowd at Firhill. That would have been amazing. Erskine is pining for one final Firhill bow, but he might not have to wait too long for it. Long-serving midfielder Stuart Bannigan was due a testimonial in the summer of 2021 that was postponed because of COVID restrictions. A new date is still to be set, but Erskine hopes that when the time comes he gets the nod from his good friend. I hope so, aye. If I don't get an invite I won't be happy. I'll be on the phone to him, he says. That would be good. If Banjo's having his testimonial at some point he'll invite me, so that would be nice. A proper farewell to the fans is all that Erskine is really missing, and for someone who means so much to so many of them, few former players deserve it more. Earlier in the week, Ian McCall described Erskine, affectionately dubbed Squiddy by the Jag support for an unusual limbs akimbo running style, as an archetypal Thistle player. He'll beat three men, put the ball into the top corner and then fall over the ball, came the assessment from the Thistle manager, who first brought the midfielder to the club in 2009. Erskine laughs. I can't really argue with that. I think the fans probably do remember me for falling over the ball as well, but that's part of what made the relationship so special. I don't think at any time anyone thought I was the best player in the world, but I was just accepted at Thistle. Even when I was at Dundee United, it wasn't really accepted. At Thistle, people would think he's fallen over the ball, but next time he gets it, he'll score. That makes you feel more comfortable, and that means you play for your best football because you don't feel that pressure to be on top of your game all the time. The gaffer is one of those guys that gets the club. He's like all the other guys in the Halls of Fame. He speaks regularly about what the club means to him and what a special club it is. He's got a good relationship with the club, and when you see what he's done for them over the years, he's done really well. When I was there, we got close to getting promoted, and he's come back and restored the club back to what it was. They still have a wee chance of getting promoted to the Premiership this year. To take the club from where it was in League One to having a chance to getting out of the Championship is amazing. When you're speaking to him, you know just what the club means to him, and I think the fans do as well. And that was an article by James Kearney.
Herald Scotland recorded on Wednesday 23rd of March 2022. Arts and Entertainments. How Mary, Queen of Scots, Changed the Fabric of the Nation and My Life by Herald Magazine by Claire Hunter. I was at primary school when I first heard of Mary, Queen of Scots. Each spring when the dandelions appeared, we would hunt them out in the playground and take turns to snap their flowers from their stems. Whoever had possession of the dandelion held it tight below its yellow bloom and administered a forceful flick in the direction of its petals to dislodge and scatter them. As spring turned to summer, those dandelions that had escaped our first wave of destruction now had their gossamer seed heads similarly dispatched with a lungful of breath. The child who achieved total decapitation was the champion. This wanton disregard for floral survival was accompanied by the collective shouting of the game's battle cry. Mary Queen of Scots had her head chopped off, her head chopped off. Mary Queen of Scots had her head chopped off on a cold and frosty morning. We'd no idea who Mary Queen of Scots was. She was accepted into our litany of imaginary characters who peopled our childhood as readily as Wee Willie Winkie and Skinny Malinky Longlegs. We did not know that she really had existed, or that she once had been our queen. In those days, at the end of the 1950s, Scotland's history was barely taught in its schools. It was an aside, subsumed into a British narrative in which the glory of the Empire and the nature of the Commonwealth were the dominant themes. Scottish children gleaned what fragments of their heritage they could from poetry and songs, from an occasional illustration in an encyclopedia, or a painting in a museum. Most of what we knew were just names: William Wallace, Robert the Bruce, Bonnie Prince Charlie, David Livingstone, but rarely a story, hardly a history, and it was a past that seemed peopled solely by men. All we knew of Mary was that she had had her head chopped off. When I was 10 years old, however, this gap in our knowledge was unexpectedly filled. Our tweed-skirted teacher was suddenly taken ill, and into her shoes stepped a temporary trainee in a toss of curls and pretty frocks. For 2 weeks we experienced a joyous reprieve from the surly sarcasm that was usually meted out. The trainee announced that we were to abandon rote learning in favour of a creative project that would involve research and design. We were to make a wall collage of the history of Scotland. Most thrillingly for me, the collage was to be made out of fabric. Already schooled by my mother in basic sewing and rudimentary embroidery, the idea of crafting a large sewn artwork was exhilarating. We were each allotted a person, place, or event from Scotland's past centuries to study and illustrate in cloth. I was given Mary. The main source of historical study in the school library was Ladybird Books' Adventure from History series. Disappointingly, there was no volume dedicated to Mary, but I found her in one devoted to Queen Elizabeth I of England. Being 10, to me Mary's story read like a fairy tale without a happy ever after. A young and beautiful queen who loses not just one but 3 husbands and is left defenceless and alone. When I learned of her escape from the clutches of her disloyal nobles, I cheered her on. When I discovered she'd been abandoned by the English Queen, Elizabeth, I was dismayed. Her end in imprisonment and execution was distressing. The illustrations of a gracious Mary in a sumptuous gown of black and gold greeting her nobility, of a feisty Mary galloping over moorland on a black stallion, and of Mary, still gorgeous and green, surrounded by armed guards, served only to kindle my captivation. I folded black velvet over a cardboard silhouette of my queen with care and stitched a narrow band of gold tinsel around her hem. I pleated a paper doily into a ruff of pretend lace and made folds of white net to fashion a veil. My mother unearthed some tiny gold beads to adorn Mary's headdress and sacrificed a gold chain to serve as a necklace. When everything was sewn in place, Mary, Queen of Scots, was stuck down in a liberal dollop of PVA glue between the head of a dead soldier slain at the Battle of Flodden in 1513 and a posy of roses and thistles that symbolised the 1603 union of the crowns, when Scotland and England began to share the same sovereign. The finished collage stretched along one wall of our classroom. When our usual teacher made her uncelebrated return and reclaimed her draconian rule, we resumed our droned recitations of catechism and multiplication tables. But the collage remained, bearing witness to our creative efforts to reimagine Scotland's past. It encouraged my interest in Scottish history and in Mary. She remained somehow in my care. In the histories and biographies of Mary written during her lifetime and the centuries following her death, she's generally cast as just one of many characters in the historical pageant. It is other personalities who drive her narrative. Mary appears as neither a catalyst nor a heroine, but a victim of circumstances and her own poor judgment. Her drama lies in loss of the queen she once was, of the monarch she might have been. Her elusiveness owes much to the bias of her contemporary biographers and historians, exclusively men, who documented and assessed the events of her reign and captivity through a masculine prism, one largely filtered through an oppositional Protestant perspective. At best they deemed Mary a naive, hapless ruler who nourished her own downfall through an inexperience, royal conceit and female frailty, but to accept this as the truth is simplistic. Mary lived in exciting times and reigned in a period of accelerating social, political, cultural and religious change. She was shaped by the sophisticated culture of the late Renaissance and influenced by those other women rulers, a surprising number of them in the 16th century, who exercised power and fostered credibility for female authority. In a world dominated by male ambition, they were at the vanguard of a new assertion of female capability, and they expressed their confidence and agency through alternative media. These were women who registered their intelligence, knowledge, values and importance through material culture as designers, collectors, consumers and creators. While staying within the confines of an acceptable female culture, fashion, hospitality, diplomacy, needlework and motherhood, they amplified their influence and repositioned themselves, if not centre stage, then at least as key players in political stagecraft. Mary, like her English counterpart Queen Elizabeth I of England, was young, vigorous and ambitious, not only for herself as a monarch and the kingdom she ruled over, but also for the dynasty that formed her. She was also, at times, reckless, manipulative and headstrong. While her decisions were purposeful, they could also be misguided, their effectiveness further blighted by betrayal. That she pursued her own style of governance is undeniable, and she harnessed the potency of textiles to emphasise her female presence and nurture her network of support. When captivity muted her voice, Mary ensured that her unedited testimony prevailed, preserving it in her embroidery. Exploring Mary through the fabric of her life, the textiles she inherited, displayed, gifted and embroidered is revelatory. Nuanced and propagandist, the material world of Mary, Queen of Scots, has been largely disregarded as a source of archival evidence by historians, but within it lies a tangible and intimate insight into the experiences and emotions of the Scottish Queen. This is an extract from Embroidering Her Truth, Mary Queen of Scots in the Language of Power by Claire Hunter, published by Sceptre, £20, by Herald magazine.
And that was this week's The Herald podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes with the publisher's kind permission. Thanks for listening.